Architectural documentation often has legends that define certain standard symbols that you're using throughout your document set. And you might see those for symbology. You might see them for different types of doors and windows. So in this video, we're going to create a door types legend, and we're going to do so using a special kind of view that Revit has called a legend view, appropriately enough. So a legend view is unique in Revit in a couple ways. It's largely a drafting view. So it's very similar to any kind of drafting view where you're just going to use detailing elements to draw what you want to draw, but it has access to a special feature called legend components, which I'm going to show you. And also legend views have another benefit in that they are one of the few types of views that are able to be placed on more than one sheet. And we'll talk about that in a future chapter. So for now, let's just go ahead and compose the legend view and look at the basic functions of working in a legend view. So to get started, we're going to go to the View tab here, and the drop down for legends is right here, and you want to create a new legend. It will ask for a name, and it will suggest a scale. Now, here in the imperial file, it's suggesting 1/4 inch equals a foot. In the metric file, it's suggesting 1 to 50. I think that's fine in both cases, so just go ahead and click OK. This creates an empty view. You could think of it as a blank sheet of paper, and we're able to draft anything that we like here. Now, that means you could go to the Annotate tab, and you could use any of the annotation tools to draw whatever you'd like to draw here for the purposes of creating your legend. That includes detail lines and filled regions and masking regions and so forth, but it also includes components and this special kind of component called a legend component. So that's what we're going to focus on here in this video, is the legend component. Now, what is this exactly? Well, the interface for this is a little bit challenging, but what you have here is on the options bar, there's this very large drop-down list. And if you scan through that list there, what you're going to see is that every single loaded family in your project and every type of that family is listed here. So notice that we've got all our casework elements, and further down we have curtain panels, and there are door elements. Well, we're interested in doors here. Now, sadly, there's no search function, so you just have to scroll through the list and find the individual elements that you're looking for. So the first thing I want to do is place my first door type, which is going to be this door single flush 36 by 84 if you're working in imperial, and it's the 900 by 2100 if you're working in metric. When you choose that, you will see a symbol appear on your cursor. You can draw that symbol in one of 3 different renditions: plan view or front or back elevation. So I'm going to switch this to the front elevation, and it will change to that kind of view, and then I will just sort of click anywhere to place it. I'll go right back to the drop down for the families and choose my next door. So that is going to be the single vision light door, and it's the same size, the 36 by 84 or 900 by 2100. Now, if you pay attention here, you can get them to line up, but sometimes it will shift, and if it does, don't worry, we can come back later and realign them. So I wouldn't worry too much about the alignment just now. I would just worry about getting them placed on the screen first. The next one I want to choose is the door exterior single 2 light. Again, 36 by 84 or 900 by 2100 if you're working in metric. And then finally, we want the curtain panel door. So that's this one right here, curtain wall double storefront. Now, this one comes in a little bit strange when it comes in because curtain wall doors are sized a little bit differently than regular doors. So it turns out, however, if you cancel out of the command and you come back and select it, that there is this host length option right here. And with a little bit of trial and error, you can come up with a size that is acceptable for this legend. And so in my experiments, 7 feet works pretty well in the imperial file, and that's about 2100 in the metric file. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag this about where I want it positioned. Now I'm going to go to the Modify tab and my Align tool, or type AL, the keyboard shortcut. And what I want to do is pick the bottom edge of the first door, and that's going to be my alignment reference. And I want you to direct your attention to the ribbon right here where it says multiple alignment. And if you hold the control key down on your keyboard, it will temporarily check that multiple alignment checkbox. Notice if I release control, it unchecks. So you don't even need to check the box. Just simply hold control down, pick this one, and then this one, and you'll notice that they're all now lined up nicely across the bottom. Okay. And then let's click the modify to get out of the align tool. All right, so those are our door legend components. Next, I want to add some dimensions. So the align dimension tool is right here on the ribbon, or you can type DI. And I'm going to place a vertical dimension right here, and then a horizontal dimension right there to mark the width and the height of my first door. I'm going to click the modify tool to get out of there. Now, you could accept the sizes that are displayed, and those are the actual sizes of the door, but you also can do this little trick. By selecting the dimension and then clicking right on the dimension text, that will actually take you to a dimension text edit window. And here you're able to choose this replace option and replace the text with whatever you'd like to say. So perhaps in the case of this legend, I would like it to say see schedule instead. Now I'm going to borrow this piece of text, Control C to copy it to my clipboard, and click OK. And notice that that now replaces the dimension value. I'm going to repeat that with this one. And if you do the value across there, it fits. But if you'd like to make it a little bit more readable, you could also use the below field here and do it that way. It's up to you, just whatever you think looks nicer. Now I'm going to select both of these dimensions and then go to copy, start right at that little endpoint right there and copy it to here and to here. Okay. And we can even try to copy it to here, but because it doesn't correspond to the same points, it's probably not going to work there. So that means for the last one, you'll just simply create those in the same way that we created the first ones. Okay. So next I want to add some text. So I'm going to go to my text tool and I'm going to give a description to this first door. Now I've got leader turned on there, so let me cancel out of there and go back in and do a text without a leader. And I will click somewhere to place the text, type in what I want it to say, and then maybe it's designation A. Now I can select both of these pieces of text and I can use the align center here to make sure that they're aligned centered to one another. And I'll just use the arrows on my keyboard to nudge that around. Now I'm going to also go to the annotate tab here, do a detail line and then a little circle. And I'm just going to draw a circle around that letter A there. Now, unfortunately, the alignment tools don't work with drafting lines. So that means you'll have to just settle for aligning this circle by eye around that letter A. So that alignment tool only works for text, but it's still pretty nice to have. So I could select all of this now and copy it. And I'll just do it from the midpoint of this door and place it in each of those locations and then just simply edit the text here. Now, as a final finishing touch to this legend views do support levels of detail. So we can choose fine level of detail and the hidden elements like the hardware will display. And then we could even call those out by adding another text note. I'll do this one with a leader. And that completes our legend view. So feel free to experiment further in this view or try your hand at creating a second legend view for a different category on your own.
In this video, we're going to begin a multi-step process of creating a construction detail. Now, the process we're going to outline is what I like to call the hybrid detailing process. Now, by hybrid, I mean that part of the detail will be live model geometry and part of it will be 2D drafted and embellishments that are placed on top of the view. And that means it's going to be a little bit drafted and a little bit live. Now, some may wonder why we would bother using any 2D detailing at all. I thought we were doing building information modeling after all. Shouldn't it all just be part of the model? Now, it's a fair question, but I'd like you to think about that question very carefully. If you just assume that everything should be modeled, what's going to happen is that you're going to find yourself modeling lots of extra detail that won't really yield very much additional benefit. And when you're done, you're going to have put in a lot of extra effort to create things that not only don't benefit you, in some cases, they could actually detract from what you're trying to do. Let me give you some examples. Theoretically, we could model every bolt and screw and mortar joint and piece of flashing that occurs in a building. And you could argue that those items are there, and therefore they should be part of the model, and they should be modeled in full 3D. And then we'll be able to schedule them and count them, and we will have all the information about them. It's true BIM. The trouble with this line of thinking is that the amount of effort that would be required to create all of those kinds of items and the time spent doing so would not really yield much payoff. Furthermore, you're creating a lot of extra detail and a lot of extra weight in the model that will slow things down potentially and really potentially take a hit on the model performance and the processing power that's required in your computer system. And in many views, you're going to want to hide all that extra information because it doesn't contribute anything to that view. In many views, you're not going to want to see all of that extra detail. So you're going to find yourself needing to hide those elements because it actually detracts from that view if it's there. And so you're spending all this extra effort to build that information into your model and then additional effort to hide it in many of the views throughout the project. So while at first the obvious answer might seem to be that we should model everything in 3D, when you start to think it through, hopefully you're going to start to see that it's not quite so easy all of the time. While there are certainly situations where you could benefit from modeling all these elements in 3D, in many places, the overall benefit will just not justify the amount of effort and the potential downsides that I mentioned earlier to modeling these elements. Now, certainly there are things that should be modeled all the time, so you want to consider it very carefully. Overall model geometry like walls and floors and roofs are things that make up the structure of the building. It is obvious that those things should always be modeled. They are going to exist in the model. They're going to show in all views. When we change them, we want to change them in one place and we want that change to occur everywhere. That's the benefit of BIM. But on the other hand, there are many small details like bolts and fasteners and flashing and mortar joints. We really just don't need to model that stuff in order to convey it accurately and communicate that information through our BIM. That stuff typically only needs to show in very limited views and often just in one view, a construction detail, and nowhere else. And we don't need to have it in full 3D in order to convey that information accurately. So as a general rule of thumb, if an item needs to show in multiple views, then yes, we should certainly model it. But when an item needs to show only in the construction detail, you should think carefully about it and decide whether or not it is worth modeling. Sometimes you will decide, yes, it is, but often you will decide that 2D detailing is sufficient to convey that information. Now, it will take time, but over time you will generate an intuition on this. So it's not going to be immediate, but as you do more of this, you will begin to understand when it makes sense to model something and when it makes more sense to just simply draft it. And so the hybrid approach allows you to do a little bit of both. It allows you to leverage the advantages of having a 3D model and then only supplement that model where necessary with the 2D elements as appropriate. So what we're going to be doing with the remainder of the videos here in this chapter is walking through the process of creating a hybrid construction detail. And we're going to approach it step by step. So we're going to start in the next video by creating a callout view of the actual live model, and then we'll begin supplementing that with two-dimensional detailing. In this video, we're going to begin creating our hybrid detail, and it starts with a callout. So that is always going to be the first step, is creating some sort of a view of your live model. Then we'll make some basic adjustments to that view, and then that will be ready for us to start adding the detailing. But we're going to set up the view here in this video. So I'm starting in a section at stair, And the detail I want to create is going to be of the stair landing condition. So I'm going to zoom in generally in that area, and then I'm going to create a callout view of that location. So you may recall that the callout view has two options, rectangle and sketch. In this case, rectangle will work just fine. We don't need to sketch any kind of a custom shape. So I'm just going to make a rather generous rectangle here initially of the area in question. And then over here, you'll see the callout bubble appears as it normally does. And of course, we can open this view in a couple ways. You can double click the bubble. You can right click it here and choose go to view. And you can also locate it on the project browser and double click it there. Now, I want to show it to you on the project browser because the next thing I want to do before I even do anything else, before I even open it, is name it. Okay, so it's a really good idea to get in the habit of naming your views right as you create them, because stair section callout 1 is just not a great name. Okay, so I'm going to rename this and I'm just going to call it stair landing detail. So it's not really important what you call it, just so long as the name is descriptive enough that folks will understand what it contains, right? Now, if your office has some office standard for naming, you can follow that instead. So now I'm going to double click my stair landing detail. That's going to open it up. And what I want to show you is the most obvious thing that changed was back here in the original stair section, we were working at 1/8 inch equals a foot in imperial or 1 to 100 in metric. And now you can see the callout came in at twice that, 1/4 inch equals a foot imperial or 1 to 50 in metric. Now, I think for a detail like this, we probably want to increase that scale even further. So I'm going to go to 1.5 inch equals a foot imperial or 1 to 10 in metric. And the obvious thing that you'll see change in the view when we do that is the grid line here will get significantly smaller. Okay. Now, if we zoom in, another thing that has changed is the line weights have adjusted to match this scale. But if you zoom in close enough, you will see that where we're slicing through the stair is bolder than where we're looking at the stair beyond off in the distance. Okay, so the line weights are still being applied. It's just that you typically have to zoom in a little closer to see them. Okay, we've now got our basic callout. We've named it. We've set the scale. Now let's consider what the callout is showing. There's a lot of geometry visible in this view that I really don't need to see. Okay, so notice that there are some curtain wall mullions here, and there's some other similar pieces of geometry here. There's a stacked wall. Even this grid line, quite honestly, doesn't really contribute anything to a stair landing detail. So your first instinct might be to select the elements and go to visibility graphics and hide that category, or use the light bulb here and choose hide category. And if you're going to hide things, then definitely hiding by category would be preferable over hiding by element. But remember what we talked about back in the chapter on visibility. Don't start with how, in other words, hiding things or changing the way they look graphically. Start with what. What should be displayed in the view, and establish that first. And then if you get to a point where the elements that are displayed in the view aren't displayed correctly, then you can adjust how they display. So the issue isn't that we want to see mullions, but these mullions aren't displayed correctly. We don't want to see these mullions at all. So is there some way that we can remove them from the view entirely without having to change the graphical settings? And it turns out the easiest solution is to consider the crop itself. When I created this callout, I made it rather large, but you can come back and select this crop rectangle. It's got these little grip controls on it, and you are able to start adjusting this in all directions to control what's being seen in this view. Now, notice over here on the right, we can easily compress that in and remove all of that extraneous geometry off to the right without hiding anything. So we don't have to now figure out what categories to hide or anything like that. We're simply going to crop in closer so that we're focusing on what's important for this detail. Now, that takes care of the stuff off to the sides, but we're still seeing some of these mullions off in the distance. Well, remember that crop regions are not two-dimensional, they're actually three-dimensional. So the extent of the view is a three-dimensional extent. So in addition to the width and the height, we've got a depth here. And you can adjust the depth on properties. So we're going to scroll down here on the properties palette. And in the extents area, you're looking for the far clip settings. Now, the far clip offset is what we want to change, but notice that that's grayed out. And the reason it's grayed out is because the far clip settings can either be same as the parent view, the original view that we cut the callout from, or they can be independent. So that's what we want to do. We want to make this view independent, and now that allows us to select and modify the far clip offset. Now you can put in any value you want here. Let's put in something really dramatic like 6 inches in imperial or 150 millimeters in metric. And that's probably a little too much, right? Notice that I've certainly focused on the landing, but I've cropped out everything else. I'm not seeing any part of the stair, and we might want to see some of the stair for context, right? So you can essentially take an educated guess here and do a little trial and error. I've done that, and 4 feet in imperial or 1200 millimeters in metric works pretty well. And that crops out any of the geometry that's off in the distance that I don't care about, but it shows me enough of the stair that we've got the context we need for this detail. Okay. So that's a really effective way to adjust what we're seeing in the view. And I didn't have to do anything in visibility graphics. Now, again, I'm not saying visibility graphics is bad or should be avoided or anything. It's just that I want you to start with the view extents and then move to visibility graphics should it become necessary. It's not necessary in this view, so I'll skip that step. But in some details you create, you might then go to visibility graphics and start hiding things or adjusting the way they display. Okay, so we've now established the model extents, but there's a second rectangle surrounding this with a dashed line, and that is the annotation extents. So callouts actually have 2 crop regions. So the inner one, as you can see, is cropping the model. But what this outer one is doing, it only applies to annotation. And the easiest way to understand that is to just place some annotation. So I'm going to go to my text tool. I'll do a piece of text without leader. I'm just going to click in the middle of the screen somewhere and type a note that we can use later, like stair nosing, and I'll click away from it and then click modify to cancel. Now I'm going to grab that note. Let's zoom in just a touch so we can see this a little better. And using the little grip control on there, I'm going to start to drag it out toward the edge. Now, as long as you keep it within that dashed box, it will continue to display. But as soon as any part of that note touches the dashed box or goes beyond it, it will disappear. And that's what the annotation crop is designed to do. So, of course, you could select this and just widen that annotation crop and the note will come back again. But you can also ask the question, do I really need an annotation crop in this detail? It turns on by default, but you don't have to leave it on. And I don't think it really contributes much to this detail. So I'm going to scroll down here to extents, and annotation crop is right there. Just simply uncheck it. That dash box will disappear. And now this stair note can go anywhere that I'd like it to go, and it will not be cropped from the view. So any hybrid detail, any detail that is going to use model geometry is going to start with a view. It can be a callout, a section, whatever kind of view you like. Then you want to adjust the cropping and the visibility, potentially, visibility graphics. And then, of course, don't forget to name it carefully. In this video, we're going to continue working on our hybrid detail. I've got my callout all set up, and now I'm going to begin adding some detail components. Now, detail components are component families that just happen to be 2-dimensional families instead of 3-dimensional families. Now, they do represent real model elements, so they are drawn to scale at the correct size, but they're only going to appear in the view that you draw them in. So we're going to start off by adding a couple that are already loaded here in this file, and then we'll load a few additional ones from the Autodesk library. So I'm going to go to the Annotate tab, and the component button is a drop-down button which has 3 options, and it's possible that it might be set to one of the other options if you use that command last. So just make sure you're choosing this top option here, Detail Component. Then over here on the type selector, I'm going to choose this C shapes in section. I've already preloaded this, and there's just one size in the file. In Imperial, it's a C6 by 10.5. In metric, it is C255 by 45. So go ahead and choose that. And it won't appear out here because even though it's a 2D view specific element, it's still considered part of the model. So you need to move into the model view and place it somewhere. And I'm just going to kind of place it slightly overlapping that stair stringer right there. It's not important that you get it precise, just kind of place it roughly on screen for now. Go right back to the type selector, and there's another family in there called break line. Choose that next, and again, kind of move your mouse into the view window. And this is just a flourish for the detail. This is just sort of graphics. It allows you to kind of indicate that the view continues off screen, right? So it's just a standard kind of break mark thing. You can tap the space bar to rotate that in 90-degree increments. So I want to rotate it vertically, and I'm going to place it over here somewhere toward the left-hand side, and I want it just inside the crop region like so. Now I'm going to click the modify tool to cancel out of there, and then notice that this break mark has some grip controls. So we can stretch it down here and up here so that it goes the full length of the detail. And then you can even adjust the shape of that little zigzag component there. I usually like to do that here on the properties palette by just typing in numbers. So this number left and right, those are the grips that I just stretched to change the length of the overall. But here, the jag depth and jag width is what you can adjust to start changing the proportion of the shape of the little zigzag shape there. So I'm going to reduce the width just a little bit. I like it to be a little narrower. So I'm going to use the same number for the depth, 2 inches imperial or 50 millimeters in metric should be pretty close. And then there's that break mark. Now, to really understand what that's going to look like, you might want to toggle off the visibility of the crop region. And so that's what it will look like in the final effect there. You'll just sort of have that break mark on the end. Now, if you want to add an additional one here at the bottom edge and along the top edge, you're welcome to do so. But I'm going to skip that for now and move on to some additional detail components. So I'm going to zoom in just a touch here, and we're going to place 2 more, and we're going to go to the Insert tab to do this, and I'm going to use the Load Autodesk family. So we've been here before. The first thing that you want to do is make sure that you're choosing the correct settings here for the little globe. So I'm in the English language and United States Imperial. There's also United States Metric and other locations. So choose the appropriate one for your preferences and what units you're working in. And then once I've done that, we can see that there's a detail items entry over here on the left-hand side. Now, you can browse through the folder structure here to locate the item you want. The item I want is in the steel folder, so it's under metals, and you've got structural steel framing. And there's AISC 14 and 15, so it's under AISC 15. And then finally, you can see a variety of different steel shapes. So we can browse to it that way. Of course, another way you can get there is to just simply search for it. So if I start searching for angle here, and that's going to make it a little simpler to find what we're looking for. So notice there's 2 angles here, one with unequal sides and one with equal sides. We're going to go with the equal sides, and then because these are 2D components, you're going to have 3 versions of each one. So there's a section cut, there's a side view, and a top view. So for this example, we're going to use a side view. So select the equal angles side, and when you load this, this family has a type catalog. Now, we've looked at type catalogs before, but just to remind you what they are, this is just a list of available types within this family. And I'm going to expand this a little bit bigger so that we can see more of the list. And notice that there are lots of sizes to choose from. So rather than load all of this and clutter up the file with a lot of stuff we don't need, you can focus on just the type or types that you're interested in. So in our case, we just want one for this example, but you can use the control key and select more than one if appropriate. But I'm just going to select the L 2x2 by 1/8 in imperial, or it is 51 by 51 by 3.2 in metric. So just choose that one size, click OK to load it, and then go back to the component tool. It should already be on your cursor here now on the properties palette. Now, this family in the imperial file is a 2-pick family, meaning you're going to click the start point and then the end point to draw out the length. If you're working in metric, you're just going to click and it's going to come in at a standard length. But in either case, when you're done, you can click the modify tool, come back and select the element that you've drawn, and then you can change the length using the temporary dimension. So let's use 6 inches imperial or 150 millimeters in metric. Now, I'm going to take this thing and just sort of move it a little bit like so. And what I want you to see about all these components is they're similar to the break mark. They all have a mask behind them that starts to cover up the model geometry in the distance. And that's really one of the built-in features of detail components. You're embellishing your model with these two-dimensional components which show more detail. So naturally, you want them to cover up the model so that you don't see that model geometry coming through. We're going to leave these randomly placed for now and adjust their positions in a future video. So for now, just having them placed and at the correct size is all we need. And we just need one more detail component. So let's go back to Insert, Load Autodesk Family. And this time, I'm going to clear the search here. And I'm going to go back to the Detail Items branch so that I'm seeing all detail items. And then I'm going to search for the word stair. Now, when you do and press Enter, all of these items pertain to stairs, and there's one called Stair Steel Pan in Section. That's the one we want to load in. Now, this one does not have a type catalog, so when it loads, it's a much simpler family with really only one type, and if you go to Component, it will put it on your cursor, and all you want to do is just kind of line it up with the top of one of the existing treads in the stair. Click the Modify tool to cancel. And then I'm going to go ahead and move this one into position using the Move tool and this endpoint at the back of the tread there and snap it right to that location. Okay, so you can still see that there's some work to do. The proportion of that doesn't match quite yet. And of course, some of the other elements we haven't positioned yet. All of that will be what we will pick up with in the next video. In this video, we're going to continue where we left off in the previous one, and we're still working on our stair landing detail. Now, in earlier videos, we created the callout around the model geometry. Then we've supplemented that model geometry with some detail components that you can see in these locations here. And I'm going to focus initially on this detail component right here, which represents the stair nosing and tread condition. And we're actually going to use an array to duplicate that down the length of the stairs. Now, before I array it, I'm going to adjust its proportions because, as you can see, it doesn't quite match the actual stair. The easiest way to tell what it should be is to select the stair in the model. And this is one of the advantages of doing a hybrid detail is you've got the model right there, so you can use the information from the model to help you. And in the Imperial file, you can see that the actual riser height is 6 and 171/256 of an inch, and the actual tread depth is 11 inches. In metric, that's going to be the actual riser height of 176.5 and the actual tread depth of 275. Now, I recommend that you write those numbers down because now we're going to need that information when we modify this family type. So we're going to select this item and then go to Edit Type. And at this point, it's up to you. You could do duplicate to create a custom type, but since this is the only place I'm going to be using this family in this model, I think it's perfectly fine to just simply modify it. So in the Imperial file, I'm going to type in that strange fraction, which was 171/256 of an inch. Make sure you put the inch symbol here. And then the tread is already 11 inches, so that's fine. And then, of course, if you're working in metric, it's 176.5 and 275 for the tread. Click OK. And now you should see the proportion of that element adjust to match the stair there. However, you'll notice that the place that I positioned it is not quite matching. So I'm going to take the front of this item and drag it back to there so that it matches where the nosings actually occur on the stairs. So now that I've got that element positioned correctly and proportioned correctly, now I'm going to move on to the array. So let me just zoom out a little bit here. The array tool is a multiple copy tool. Keyboard shortcut is AR. And when you select that command, all of its options will be on the options bar. So there are two kinds of arrays. You can do a linear array or a radial array. A radial array would go around a curve. So naturally, in this case, we're going to leave it set to linear. Next comes group and associate. You want to leave that turned on. That's going to leave the array parametric, meaning that later you can come back and adjust the settings and it will impact all instances of the array. So it's literally using the group feature that we've discussed in earlier videos. The quantity of arrayed items is here. And I'm going to start with a quantity of maybe 4. That should be enough to cover up all of the stairs here. And then you can either move the second or the last. Now, what that means is think of second as setting the distance between the arrayed items, and think of last as setting the total size of the array, and it will fit them all in between. So in this case, second is the appropriate choice because we know the size of one stair tread, and we're going to use that as the size for the array. Now, the easiest way to do that is directly on screen. So what you want to do is snap to some convenient location in the model, and then move and snap to the corresponding location on the next tread down. So I did the back endpoint on the upper tread there, and I'm going to go to the back endpoint on the one below it, and that will array along that diagonal. Now, if you moved horizontally or vertically, then you'd get a linear or vertical array, but I got a diagonal array because of the direction that I moved in. Now, somewhere on screen, you should be seeing a dimension with the quantity that you specified. So one of the advantages of this grouped and associated array is you can adjust this quantity after the fact and notice that it will either add or remove elements. So if I went to 2, you can see that removes some of the elements. If I go to 5, it adds new ones. Now, you can see that they're kind of going off screen there because remember that detail components, even though they're 2D elements, are still being controlled by the crop region of this view. So even though I did 5, items 4 and 5 are actually going off the screen and being cropped. All of this only occurs in this view. And we mentioned that before, but just to kind of make sure that you understand that, if I go back to the original parent view here, sectionette stair, notice that none of those detail components appear here. We're not seeing the arrayed stair treads. We're not seeing the elements we left floating over here. So I'm going to close that view and go back to our detail. Everything that we're doing is just here in this detail. Now what I want to do is add this component, this little angle, to each of the stair treads. And that's going to be another advantage to this group and associate idea. If you hover over one of the stair treads, you're going to see that it is a grouped element. It's got that little dash box around it. When I select that element, Edit Group will be available here on the ribbon. We're going to click that. Now, the last time we edited a group, we were using a model group. This is a detail group, but it works the same way. So now what I want to do is use this add tool right here to add an element to the group. And I'm going to add in our angle element right there. And then I'm going to click the modify tool to get out of add mode. Now, this item is part of the group, but it's in the wrong position. So I will simply move it from its midpoint right there to the midpoint along the bottom of our stair element. I'll click finish, and when you do, it will add that to each of the arrayed elements. And so that's one of the advantages of using an array here, is that you get that group functionality and you're able to repeat those elements easily in that fashion. Now, this item I'm just simply going to move to a more favorable location, and using the temporary dimension here, I'll set that to a distance of maybe 2 inches in imperial and 50 millimeters in metric. So that completes our arrayed stair treads. In the next video, we'll add the final finishing touches to the geometry of this detail in the form of masking and filled regions. In this video, we're going to add some filled and masking regions. Now, both of these share in common the property that they are custom shapes that you draw from a sketch that will cover up the model geometry underneath. We've actually got examples of both of them already here in the file. The brake line family that we created earlier has a built-in masking region, and you can see when I select it that the geometry is kind of showing through it. So that mask is covering up part of that geometry to give us the desired visual effect. And the stair nosing detail element here has a built-in filled region for the concrete pan there, and you can see that it's got the little stipple pattern and so forth. So the only real difference between a filled region and a masking region is whether or not it has a hatch pattern. Now we're going to create one of each of these here in this video, and rather than do it inside a family like those two examples, I'm going to just build them directly on the view here. So let's start with a masking region. What I want to do is cover up some of this stair geometry that's behind the detail components that doesn't really contribute to the detail. So I'm going to go to annotate, and you've got this region tool here, and you can do either a filled or masking region. So I'm going to start with masking region. That puts me in sketch mode, and you can just start drawing, but I think it'll be easier to use the pick lines and just sort of use the underlying model geometry and basically trace over it. So I want to use an appropriate line style. So it's already set to thin lines. I think that's going to be fine for this example. And I'm going to touch this edge, this one, and this one. Now, those go off screen there. So what I'm going to do is just switch to the line tool and just draw a vertical line past the break line here. Click the modify tool to cancel, and then I'm going to do trim and extend to a corner and clean that up. So it is like other sketches that needs a closed shape before you can continue. So I've got that now, and I can click the finish edit mode button here, and that creates the shape. And notice that it is being cropped by the view. So that extra bit off to the bottom there was just to finish the sketch. But when we're done, it will look something like this, but you're probably thinking, well, that doesn't look so good. Well, the next concept that I want to talk about is stacking order. So when you have these detail components in a view, you get to determine which one sits on top of the others. So the easiest thing to do is just select one of the elements, and then you've got the arrange buttons here, and you can either bring them to front or send them to back. So in this case, I want to take this masking element and send it all the way to the back. That's going to put it at the bottom of the pile. And notice that all of the other detail components will jump forward now relative to it. And when I deselect it, it looks like that. So notice that send to back doesn't mean send it behind the model. The model is always underneath the detailing. So the detailing always sits on top of the model, and the stacking order is just relative to other detail elements. When we consider our stair pan array here, it was created after the break lines. So that break line is underneath the stair pan. You can use a similar tool here to bring that break line to the front. And now that looks a lot better, right? Because now that break line is covering that extraneous piece of the array. Okay, so using your send to back and move to front buttons, you can shuffle these things around to make for a more convincing graphical appearance there. Okay, so next I want to focus on the landing itself. And what we're going to do here is use a filled region. And I want to make a filled region that kind of looks like this stair pan to represent the landing geometry. So I'm going to go back to the region drop down, choose a filled region. And then once again, we can choose the pick lines tool to be able to trace some of the existing geometry. But since we're going to be cutting through this element, rather than thin lines, I want to use something a little bit bolder. Now, I think wide lines might be a little too thick for this example, so I'm going to start with medium lines and see what that gives me here. And I'm going to pick this top edge, this one here. I'm going to use the top of the piece of steel right there. And then I'm going to zoom in near the steel pan. And in addition to the standard line types, the dash lines, the heavy lines, the thin lines, you also have an invisible lines. So when it touches this existing detail element, I don't want a bold line there. So I'm actually going to use invisible lines to grab that shape. And then you got to zoom in nice and close and get this little vertical line right there too. Okay, because remember, you have to have an enclosed sketch. So now I'm going to do trim and extend a corner and trim this item back to that little vertical line and trim this diagonal line to this one. And then finally this one to the one over here running vertically and close it up there as well. And when we click finish, that will complete the shape. And it's assigning it to a crosshatch initially, but you can just simply select it and choose a more appropriate fill pattern from the list here. However, you'll notice I don't have a concrete one, so let's just make one. So we'll click Edit Type. We will duplicate. I'll call it concrete. We'll click OK, and then just change the fill pattern here to concrete. And you can even just search for it. There it is right there. And I'll choose OK, OK again. And now that has the correct fill pattern. So those are the filled and masking regions. Now we do have a few more finishing touches to do to complete this detail, and that will be the subject of the next video. So there's still a few more things we need to do to finish up this detail. In this video, I'm going to focus on adjusting some of the graphics and adding some notes to finish up the detail. So as far as the graphics goes, we're going to look at a tool that we've discussed previously, and that is the line work tool. And I want to show you a few ways we can use the line work tool to enhance this detail. The one area that could use a little attention is the ends of these railings here. Revit doesn't always do a very nice job in rendering curves in elevation and section views, as you can see there. So those pipe railings are round in 3 dimensions. So not only are they round in the section cut that we're seeing here, but they're also turning the corner and rounded. And so you can see that the edge is just losing some of its definition there. So we can fix that in some cases with the line work tool. So I'm going to go to Modify, choose line work or LW, and pick a line style. So thin lines, I believe, is going to match what we already have here. And then I'll zoom in nice and close so you can see this take shape. You should be able to click right on that rail and then just simply fill those areas in where there are gaps. Now you could also do it across the bottom right here. You can see there's some gaps there. So it's a nice way to kind of clean up areas where the geometry is not rendering perfectly on its own. So we can just do a couple of those, and down here as well. And I think that looks a whole lot better. Okay. Now, staying with the line work tool, sometimes folks like to show the treads and risers of the opposing run of stairs dashed in behind the stringer. Now, I can't see those edges right now in order to do that. So I'm going to cancel out of the command. I'm going to temporarily change this view to wireframe. And you may recall that wireframe just shows all the geometry right through. Nothing is hidden. Now, let's zoom in nice and close here on these tread conditions. Let's go back to the line work tool, and let's change this to a dashed line, or a hidden line. There's a hidden line type right here. And then I'm just going to start touching some of these edges. Now this one goes a little too long, so you can stretch it back. Remember, we did this in an earlier video. So this is hopefully review for you, but I will just go ahead and continue this. And then when we're done, we can cancel the command. And then to see the final result, you just change this back to hidden line, and it should look something like that. Now, if you missed one, like I did right there, you can simply go back to the line work tool, touch the same line again. That will redisplay the little grip, and then you can adjust it and fix that. So real easy to fix if you miss one. And I think that looks a lot nicer. So that completes the graphics of this detail. And then really all it needs is some notes and possibly some dimensions. Now you can use dimensions in this view just like you can in any view. So if you want to indicate the size of items, like maybe the offset of the stringer off the nosing, you can do that. And then, of course, you can add notes just the same way that we did in the videos where we talked about that, complete with leaders. And when you're done, it might look something like this.